Welcome back to the Chapter 9 Code With Me videos. In this video, we're going to start with Activity 913. So if you haven't already added this basic information to the Apply HTML file, go ahead and do so, or follow the first Code With Me video to make sure you have all the information we have done so far. Because in Activity 913, we're adding radio buttons. Now, if you recall from the lecture, a radio button only allows you to choose one button or one choice per grouping. I'll show you what the difference is and how we actually identify the different groups. So first what we're going to do is we're going to be inserting, most likely on line 40, the following information. Willing to work as an unpaid intern. That's all we're going to add. We could add it as a paragraph tag or something later, but we'll get to that in just a bit. What we're actually paying more attention to is the radio buttons. Now, the input type is not radio button, it's just radio, just like input type equals number or input type equals email. ID, yes. Name, unpaid. Didn't this just invalidate my previous rule of having the IDs and the names being the same thing? Well, you know what? Let's make that yes and see what it does. Now, don't forget with radio buttons, the label goes outside, or in this case, to the right of the input field. With the previous ones, we have label before the input. In this case, we have the label after the input. Yes, label, and then input type, equal sign, radio, ID, no, name, no, label, ID, no, no, label. Okay, so let's save, let's refresh, and I forgot the line break. There we go. So, willing to work as an unpaid intern, yes or no? I select yes. Apply. Yes is on. Okay, I don't know what that means. Let's go back. Let's refresh. Willing to work as an unpaid intern? No. Apply. No. On. Okay. Well, what if I say I'm willing to work as an unpaid intern? Yes. But then I change my mind. No. Wait a second, I have both of these selected. How'd that happen? Well, how that happened is that we did not identify a radio button group, and that is done by using the name attributes. So in this case, we're going to say unpaid. Unpaid. We are making these two have the same name, so that way, as soon as the information is passed, it tells the form handler exactly what the variable is that is being passed. So in this case, we save, we refresh. Willing to work as an unpaid intern? Yes. Well, maybe not. Okay, so I can choose one or the other, but not both. Okay, what if I select one, click apply, unpaid, un? Okay, well, what if I select yes? Unpaid, on. Well, that doesn't do me any good. So how do I remedy this? How do I know which selection the person chose? What we do with that is we actually say value. We can actually specify a value to these radio buttons, so that way as soon as something is selected, it stores this information inside this variable and passes that variable with this information to the form handler. So we save, we refresh, we click yes, click apply, unpaid, yes. Okay, we change our mind, go to no, apply, no. What if we say no way? Back to form, save, refresh, we click no, apply, no way, not happening. So this way you can tell it what information you want to pass based on the variables and based on the information that you're going to be passing to it. Should the value and the ID in radio buttons equal? It's not required, but it's a good practice to have, especially if you have the information that you want to be unique. But if you have something simple like yes and no, the ID doesn't need to be yes and no. It can be something super complex once you get into more complex forms and CSS. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're actually going to make the radio button, in this case the yes one, pre-checked. And that is actually a Boolean value. So you can say checked or you can say checked equals true. Both do the exact same thing. But in this case, we're just going to say checked. So we save, we refresh, and look at that. Yes is already selected. If I click no and refresh, it goes back to yes. That means that yes is automatically pre-checked because we use the checked attribute, which again is a Boolean, inside the radio button input type. Okay, next what we're going to be doing is adding more information after the no line. In this case, prefer to work, :BR. Input type, radio. Name, work. Shift, ID, morning. Value, morning. Label, for morning. Morning. And guess what? We're doing this 2 more times. Don't forget the name should be the same. Actually, you know what? Let's save that. That's fine. Okay, so we've just created 3 new radio buttons for morning and afternoon and night. Not evening, night. Okay, so we save, we refresh, and now we have prefer to work, morning, afternoon, and night. There we go. Okay, but I've actually created a mistake in this. Can you catch my mistake? The mistake itself is actually having a different name for the night option. So if we go down here, we select morning, afternoon, and then night. Why is night still checked? That's because according to the browser, this is a different or a different radio button group. So as soon as I list it as the same name, now I can choose morning, afternoon, or night and go back and forth. All right, so just to do a bit of checking, prefer to work, afternoon, apply, and we say work shift, afternoon. Good, okay. Next, we're working with activity 9.16, where we're actually going to be adding select menus. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to skip a line after night and have a label. Yes, we're starting with labels again. For department. My first choice is to work with label. Select. We are not using input types here. To create select menus or drop-down boxes, we're using the select tag. This has the same attributes, ID, department, because that and this match. Name department, to give it something to pass the variable with. Close the select and have a line break. Now, if you save and refresh, you pay attention, you notice that there's a drop-down box, but there's nothing in it. Well, we don't have anything in our options, so let's go ahead and add some options. Option, front-end development. Option, back-end development. Now, before I proceed with the rest, I do want to point out exactly the information that's being passed here. So if you save and refresh, you'll notice that the Select drop-down box automatically fills with the options we have selected, in this case, front-end development and back-end development. Well, the good thing is, if you select one and apply, it automatically says Department Back-end Development, which is correct because, well, that's the one that we chose. If we modify this to anything else such as DevWorks, we save, we refresh, we choose Backend DevWorks and apply, you can see that same information is passed. So how can we pass information that we know will work in our system, but the person doesn't need to know but can't select? What we do is we actually pass a value to the option as well. In this case, we can say front end and value back end. So what this means is that no matter what information is passed here, because the text is actually passed as the default value, now we have a value set. So no matter what they choose, back in DevWorks, apply. Department is back end because that is the value that we passed for this option. I'm going to change this back to development for this example. Go back to our form. We're good. Okay. Let's finish this up. So value equals database development. So don't forget that once this information is submitted, it'll just pass the value database. Option value planning, project planning, option value, spell value right, service, customer service, and last one is sales. Sales, easy as that. So, should you add a value to all of your different options? It's a good practice to do so. Otherwise, you're going to have to go back and rework some old code, and that's never a good thing. So in this case, if you automatically add the value attribute and give it a value versus just the default text, it'll make things easier for you and easier on other developers. So save, refresh, and now you can see we have a nice big list to choose from. Project planning, apply, and the word that was passed is planning. Good. Okay, activity 917. We're creating a second select option, or select box, to display multiple options at once. So the first thing is our label. For experience, I have experience with label and line break. Select ID, experience, name, experience, size. Size, what does that do? Well, let's take that away for a moment and I'll show you exactly what it does. Close the select, close the line break. Okay, so inside this we save, we refresh, we'll make sure we have a drop-down box. We do? Good. Option, HTML. Close the option. Option, CSS. Option, JavaScript. Option, PHP. Option, MySQL or MySQL, depending on how you pronounce it. Option, PostgreSQL or PostgreSQL. Option, Microsoft SQL or SQL Server. Now, why did I not add the value here? Well, because everything here is the exact information we want to pass to our form handler. So it's okay not to add the value here. It is good practice, though, to make sure you add the value to everything. So let's see. Save, refresh. I have experience with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, MySQL, PostgreSQL, and Microsoft SQL Server. Well, what if I have experience in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and PHP, and MySQL? Well, the select box only allows me to select one option. I can't select more than one option. So what do? I can go back to the code and say size equals 7, as long as I have the appropriate closing quotes. Save, refresh, and look at that. Now I can choose more than one option. It's not letting me do that. So what do? We make it work. And that means that we add the multiple attributes. So save, refresh, and how do I add more? Hey, look at that. I'm actually adding more by pressing the Shift key, and it allows me to select one, and then press the Shift key, select another, and it selects all the ones in between. If I just press the Control, doesn't do that. If I press the Command or the Alt key, I can select multiple ones. Well, what if I have experience in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, and MySQL? What happens when I submit information? Hey, look at that. Experience, HTML, experience, CSS, experience, JavaScript, etc. Once we get into more advanced form handlers, you'll be able to take this information and process it in the appropriate manner. For now, let's keep adding more form fields. Actually, what we're doing is we're actually backtracking a little bit and grouping our options. In this case, we're actually going to be going around line 67, experience menu, right here, in this case line 68 for me, and we're going to add an opt group label programming. Now why don't I just create an opt group and have programming outside of it, like this? Well, that's because the opt group requires the label because you're actually going to have all this information inside of that opt group or that option group. If you were to just have programming outside of it like this, then that wouldn't make any sense. It makes sense for list items, but not for opt groups. So you need to have the label inside the opt group. What does that do? Well, we save, we refresh, and now you can see programming is a nice bold header right here. We can't select it, but we can select items below it. Anything that's not in an opt group is still tabbed over to the left. So let's add the rest inside of an opt group. Label databases. Opt group. Good. And we tab all this over because we're good developers. We want to see where our code is. We save, we refresh, and now we have databases. Good. All right, the first thing we're going to do next is locate the customer service option in the first drop-down box or select menu of the department. In the customer service one, we're actually going to add the selected attribute. What that means is that if you pay attention to the department right here, the drop-down box where it says front-end development, we save, we refresh, and now customer service is the first one chosen, even though it's in the exact middle of the drop-down list. That's because we have pre-selected it, just like we made the unpaid intern. Yes, pre-checked. Same concept, but with drop-downs. Okay, now we're going to add checkboxes. So down here, I am comfortable with BR. Input type, checkbox. And again, we're adding the input type first and then the label. So checkbox, ID, Windows, name, Windows, value, comfort. What does all that mean? Just wait a few seconds and we'll get back to it. Label for Windows. Windows, obviously. Okay, we're good with that. We save, we keep adding. Input type, check box, ID, Mac, name, Mac, value, comfort. Wait, didn't we just work with the radio buttons and make sure the name was the same thing? Why is the name different here? We'll get to that in just a minute. Label for Mac. Mac, or in this case you could say Macintosh if you want to actually put the full name there. Most people just know it as Mac. Label, line break, and line break up here. Input type, checkbox, ID, Linux. And if you know what Linux is, good for you, extra points. Value, comfort. Label for Linux. Linux. Spell it correctly. And close our label and line break. Now, what exactly did we do here? Well, if you save and refresh, you notice that we now have a checkbox list. I'm comfortable with Windows, Mac, and Linux. I can choose one, I can choose two, or I can choose all three. Well, what if I just choose two? How does the information get passed to the form processor? Well, in this case, Windows is comfort, Linux is comfort, but Mac didn't pass. What you can do is you can set the same name for all of these, and that'll actually be passed as an array. But that's a little more advanced that we're getting into for this course. So in this case, having the name and the ID for checkboxes is perfectly fine. The value is just something that's going to be passed. Otherwise, if you leave out the value, we save, move back to the form, we refresh, we select Windows and Mac. Click Apply, and this says Mac is on. Well, that's not what we wanted. We wanted to say comfort. So in this case, value equals comfort. So that way, as soon as the information is passed, it says Windows or Mac comfort, and that should say comfort. Okay, the last video we'll be doing, or the last activity we're doing for this video is adding a data list. Now, data list is a little different. So try to pay close attention. The first thing we'll be doing is we'll be adding label for. Actually, before I do that, let me make sure I explain something with the labels. The labels themselves, especially for checkboxes, make the tiny little checkbox a little easier to work with. If you noticed, I clicked on the actual name of the distribution versus just the little tiny checkbox. This is great, especially in a mobile environment when you have big, thick fingers, and the little tiny checkbox is not easy to check. So in this case, by using labels, such as Windows, you can click the name and it'll check the box or uncheck the box for you. Okay, next is label for Linux distro. If you work with Linux, which distribution is your favorite? As soon as I learn how to spell distribution right. Distrib. There we go. Label. Input type. Now, keep in mind that for a data list, we don't need a different input type. We just need an input type of text. ID, Linux, distro, name, Linux, distro. And don't forget, IDs and names can have dashes in them. Okay, next, let's create the data list. Now, a data list is a tag all on its own. ID equals distros. You know what these are? More power to you. Actually, if you get a chance to check out Kubuntu, I highly recommend it. Okay, so now we've created our data list. We've created our text box for the input. We save, we refresh. We notice that I forgot the line break again. Save, refresh. There we go. So if you work with Linux, which distribution is your favorite? Well, my favorite is going to be Fedora. Okay, that's not what I wanted. I wanted it to be one of these. So let's say I want it to be Ubuntu. But it's not giving me any options. So how do I connect this data list to this input text box? Well, what we do is we actually say list as an attribute inside of the text box and assign that value as the same ID as the data list that we created. So the data list ID and the list value for the input type text should be the same. We save, we refresh. If you work with Linux, which distribution is your favorite? Hey, look, a drop down. Okay, I can choose one of these. I'm going to say Ubuntu. Apply. Work. Perfect. But what if I want to provide my own? Well, if I say Fedora, that still allows me to select it. If I start typing something, such as I type in the letter U, it gives me all the different options that have the letter U in it. Because if you notice, the option Tails does not have a U. If I continue typing UB, it tells me Kubuntu, Ubermix, and Ubuntu. I continue typing again, it gives me more options that have narrowed down to what I'm typing in. I can select one or I can finish typing, either way. Okay, so again, the data list allows people to choose an option that is currently allowed, or they can provide their own. Again, Fedora, or even to get even more geekness, Fedora Core. Apply, and it still allows me to provide it. Okay, so that is everything for this video. In the next video, we'll talk about some uncommon input types and some different options other than just input. If you have any questions about this or anything in Chapter 9, please send me an email or hit me up on Twitter. I'll get back to you with the best possible answer.